hand over the stage to Michael because he would like to ask you a couple of questions around sustainability. Thank you,
Sure.
Michael.
Thanks, Anu. Hey, Paul. Firstly, as a father or a parent with two children at university, talking about debt-free students, I love the sound of that. I'm going to put them on a plane to California now and get them enrolled straight away.
Bring
Yeah. You've touched upon really interesting points around diversity, and also you've touched upon sustainability and procurement. Sustainability is something I'm quite passionate about. What do you actually mean by sustainability and procurement? And importantly as well, how is it measured?
Yeah, great question. So, we for each of our major spend categories, there's a pretty clear set of criteria that have been established as part of the UC's sustainable procurement guidelines that determine and define whether or not that item is considered a green purchase within for that category. And so the things that are taken into consideration are things like recycled content, or or for example, single-use plastics in the supply chain for the item. And so for each spend category, we have a pretty detailed definition of what's considered a green spend, and then we have set as a target that for each one of those categories, we want to make sure that we are buying at least 25% green spend based upon those definitions. Some of them, like for our industry standards, so like LEED certification for construction and things like that. And then others are very specific designations that our sustainability team has come up with.
Okay. And do you actually, and I'm sort of coming off piece, do you continue to monitor those suppliers through effective KPIs based upon those sort of green purchase initiatives then?
Yeah, so we do. So we have a green spend report that we publish every year, which is an assessment of the items that are being purchased and those suppliers. We also partner closely with EcoVadis. So we have the EcoVadis is an industry standard that does an assessment of the suppliers' sustainability across a number of different metrics. So we use EcoVadis as like the baseline for our assessment of the supplier. And then we dig into the more detail on the specific items that we're buying from the supplier and provide that as part of the green reporting.
Yeah.
And we are working right now, and we still haven't figured out the most effective way to do this, but we also, in order to comply with some state statute, are working on a means of ensuring that we have the recycled content amount for every item that we buy. And so we're still trying to figure that out. If folks listening are aware of a tool that is helping them with that, please drop the link in the chat. And so I'll put a shameless plug for some crowdsourcing of solutions.
Yeah, we're seeing a big rise in the use of EcoVadis in the supply chain, and Ecology as well, another supplier in that space. The pressure to meet these sustainability goals, how does it actually affect supplier selection? Now, I know you touched upon, especially within the UC, not awarding suppliers based on diversity credentials, for example, but obviously in terms of sustainability goals and objectives, how does that affect your supplier management, selection and management within the public and your experience in the private sector as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is one area. So while we're very limited in terms of what we can do within California for supplier diversity, on the flip side, we have a lot of latitude in terms of sustainability. So for each RFP, we actually, as a UC policy, are required to allocate a minimum of 15% of the points for the RFP for the sustainability impact of the proposal. And so we're able to be very deliberate in asking things like, how does your proposal positively benefit the sustainability profile of the state of California? Tell us more. We can ask more about the supply chain that they're using to provide, to provide the good or the service for us. And again, that is directly included in our RFP scoring. We also do a lot at UC and invest a lot in trying to do things like introducing sustainable farming practices. So the university, for example, buys a lot of food, and we realize that we actually have the scale to try to help influence farming practices across the state. So I'm actually just coming from 2 days that we spent along with some nonprofit organizations like the Alice Waters Institute and Roots of Change, and organizations that are focused on sustainable and regenerative farming practices. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how we can collaborate with smaller, local, minority-owned farmers to meet the needs of the university, and also to help enable them to be able to adopt more sustainable farming practices.
That's one heck of a challenge. My son is doing agriculture at university, and a big part of this is about sustainable agriculture. And there's arguments on both sides of the fence. You mentioned obviously some of those sustainability criteria that organizations focus in on, and you mentioned sort of green purchases, recycling plastics, etc. Staffing services, are quite different. How do you how can those criteria be balanced with something like the supply of services, especially around staffing, when we don't have single-use plastics, for example? And when you really need to focus in on a cost-effective staffing solution, how do you balance those priorities?
Yeah. No, that's a great question as well. And that's one of the ways in which I think partnering with someone like EcoVadis is very helpful, in the sense that they're looking at the entire business delivery model end to end. And so while there isn't necessarily like a finished good in the staffing model, there's a decent amount of infrastructure that all of the staffing services providers are utilizing to get the employees or the staff to us. And so things like whether or not they've got internal recycling programs, or whether or not they're paying attention to the equipment that they buy, and what or the buildings that they're building as part of their infrastructure for us, goes into the assessment of those those suppliers. And my advice that I would give to staffing organizations is that there still will be an assessment, at least for UC, and I think for most organizations, there still will be some question around what are you doing in terms of socially responsible programs and activities within your organization. And I think looking at things like the sustainability of the infrastructure to support the team is a great way to do that. Be prepared, I would say, to speak to that. I would encourage folks to take advantage of a third-party system like EcoVadis, because it's just it's clear, it's common, everyone understands it. I understand there's an expense associated with EcoVadis, but I think the return is actually, pretty good. One of the things we did
we are evaluating the cost benefit with EcoVadis actually at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, there is a cost there, but the benefit that it gives you is just a clear, objective score that folks accept and understand. One of the things too that I would encourage staffing companies to do, or all professional service providers to do, is go ahead and be mindful of and be able to report on the diversity even within your staff. So at UC, we don't necessarily ask for this because of Prop 209, but in my private sector roles, our large partners who were providing professional services to us, we asked them about what's the diversity of the team that you guys are providing to support us, and understanding that there are the correctly proportional numbers of women in leadership, and that there's diversity represented across all of those. And so I would say a company could do themselves a service by being prepared to provide that, or even leading with the fact that they're tracking that information.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive, broad subject, going from who do we use for our data center, is there carbon, how are we managing our carbon footprint, paperless offices, all of that sort of stuff. In terms of the sort of diverse supplier integration with sustainability, the sort of juncture at that, how do how can diverse suppliers integrate sustainability into their service offerings to meet the increased demand for environmentally responsible solutions?
Mhm.
And is that different across public and private sectors?
Yeah, great question. I think it's consistent across both. I think to the extent that the company, can afford, again, having a program that is already defined, being able to articulate the goals and objectives and the progress against those programs, is helpful. And again, I think I feel like EcoVadis should be paying me for this, but using
Yeah,
tapping into industry standards just so that it's clearly understood by others is also very helpful. But I would say that there isn't really much difference between public and private sector in terms of how to do that. And my advice would be, almost consider that a foundational part of doing business. So the same way in which, as a company is thinking about engaging a potential customer, there's a capability statement that talks about the specific business that you're doing. I would include also in that capability statement, just the things that you're doing already, for that relate to sustainability and supplier diversity, et cetera, and just make that part of the proactive, statement of the way that you operate, rather than waiting for the supplier or waiting for the customer or potential customer to ask about it.
yeah. Because I think I mean, I was going to ask you about the sort of the strategies that diverse suppliers can use to highlight, their sustainability efforts and credentials. Obviously,
Mhm.
we've already touched upon EcoVadis. But if you are, for example, a small minority-owned business that can't, for example, afford
Yeah.
ecology, how
Right.
else or what other strategies can those diverse suppliers use to highlight those sustainability initiatives, and especially within sort of when they're competing for contracts through RFI processes, etc.? Because that's a big challenge.
Yeah. Again, I think the biggest thing that they could do is be proactive in having a program in place at the scale of your business, and then proactively communicating that there's the program that is there as part of, the foundational conversation with that, with the customer. So, you know, sustainability programs are things that you can scale up to the size of the business, even if it's a relatively small operation. A 10-person operation can have a recycling program, or some focus on making sure that they are considering sustainability when they purchase the, paper, the office equipment, that the things that are supporting the business. So even a very small, business can have some stated practices and stated values around supplier diversity that they're putting in place. And so my advice is, go ahead and build that into the DNA of what you're doing, and then be proactive in communicating that when you're discussing the value proposition to potential customers. So, most of those customers eventually are going to ask at some point in the solicitation process if you have a program. I would encourage, smaller and diverse businesses to be proactive in having that part, be part of the value that you're
Mm.
communicating to those suppliers, even before it's asked. And it's one of those things that, it scales to the size of the business. They should not necessarily feel obligated to put, a massive corporate the amount of resources in doing it if they're a smaller shop, but they can do something that matches and fits the scale of the size that they are. And, I would argue, like, if you do that as you grow, it's going to be part of the DNA of the company anyway. So it'd be better and easier for them to be able to do it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you start with a 5-person company and you're already starting to measure your carbon footprint at that stage, it's a lot easier to do it then rather than when you're 1,000-employee business. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the good news is, like, things like carbon footprint, there are calculators that are available, on the market. It's such
Yeah.
an important part of business now that there are publicly available free tools that you could use to start to track your carbon footprint, or even your travel. Most of the travel tools that are available right now, will give you some visibility to what's the carbon impact of what you buy. If I go on United United and buy airline ticket, I can actually see carbon footprint. So you don't have to have an expensive third party or a full-time sustainability resource on the team to put some of these practices in place that indicate that you're making this a priority for your business. And my advice to smaller and diverse businesses is build that in as early as you can and communicate it as early as you can, because it is part of the value proposition by which you're going to be assessed at some point.
Absolutely. Well, look, Paul, Annie's put her camera back on, which means we've probably run out of time. Hey, look, thank you for that. That's fascinating. And actually, I think really aligned with what our thinking is as we're growing, especially across Europe as well, because a lot of these initiatives are really coming to the fore now with new legislation. So thank you. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Michael, also for making sure that you managed to ask all the questions we had in the. I know I gave you less time than initially.
That's all right.
We have Kefun, who says very interesting insight on public versus private sector. I recognize a few faces in the audience. I recognize Lorena, who's from the NMSDC. She heads the Corporate Plus program. She's one of our huge supporters, joins in, and she loves to see how her larger MBEs are putting their word out and encourages a lot of all the community impact work that we do, or in general, a huge support. So thanks for joining in, Lorena. I can see that Mark is typing in a question. Mark heads our corporate communications, and he has done a lot of work on the environmental aspect of our company. Whatever initiatives we have taken on, it is he who has made sure that we get the work put together. So he does have a question. He says there is a perception that public sector entities can write RFPs and or evaluate proposals in such a way to drive awarded business to incumbents or preferred vendors. In your experience, is there any merit to this perception, or do you believe public sector procurement is truly vendor neutral?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I've been in procurement for 30 plus years. You can always write an RFP in a way that steers the results in the way that you want. So it would be disingenuous for me to tell you that that is not possible to happen. It can always happen. What I would say though is that it's definitely it's not good sourcing, and it is not helpful to the buying organization to limit in that way. Part of the role, and I tell this to my team, part of the role of the procurement organization is to advocate for suppliers within the organization to make sure that folks are thinking through, and assessing all of the capability that's out there. And so that's, you hope that doesn't happen. Is it possible for it to happen? Absolutely. It happens in the private sector just as much as it's just as possible in the private sector as in the public sector. But as much as possible, there, that's part of the role of the procurement organization, is to make sure that that's not happening, and that we are making sure that everyone gets a fair shake. I do want to highlight, I put 2 email addresses in the chat. The first is mine, and the second is the email address of the person who leads our supplier diversity, economic impact, and sustainability programs. And so if anyone wants to know more about the programs, please reach out to, his name is Abimbola Odusoga, or to me.
Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate your time today. A lot of very useful points, and we will be posting this whole video on YouTube. And we usually do snippets of some of the more impactful things that we got out of the conversation today. We'll be posting it on social media. And so that's why I've posted all our social media channels. We are there on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, So follow us and keep in touch. Thank you so much, Paul. That was a wonderful
No, thank you,
conversation.
Anu. Thank you, Anu. It's been great chatting with you. And thank you, Michael, as well. Good chatting with
Yeah.
you as well.
Great time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.